From opium to OxyContin, the family behind addiction empires, how the Sassoon economic empire contributed to China's handover of Hong Kong to Britain. They were the architects of addiction, masters of dependency, and the original industrialists of human suffering. Before the Sacklers, before opioids became a pandemic in America, there were the Sassoon's merchants turned kings of opium, shaping continents, economies, and generations. Millions addicted, nations destabilized, yet history celebrated them. They didn't hide in shadows. They were knighted. Their names were carved in stone, in hospitals, in libraries. They were untouchable. And what they did a century ago still echoes today in our medicine cabinets, in pills we swallow, in dependency we barely recognize. Baghdad, 1832. A city of golden domes and narrow alleyways, bustling with merchants, scholars, and courtiers. Dust swirled in the streets as the heat shimmered off sandstone walls. In the heart of this city, a Jewish merchant family faced a choice. Pay tribute to a governor who threatened imprisonment, and worse, or flee and leave everything behind. David Sassoon, the eldest, stood among crumbling ledgers and fading coins, watching the weight of persecution settle on his people. His father's treasury, the family fortune, had been meticulously built over decades, and now it was under siege. Extortion, threats. A city that had once been a cradle of trade and learning had become a trap. David made a decision that would change the course of history. He would leave, not just for survival, but for vision. With his wife, children, and loyal aides, he departed Baghdad under the cover of night, carrying precious manuscripts, account books, and a few crates of goods. They traveled by caravan to Iran, navigating deserts, mountain passes, and the ever-present threat of bandits and hostile officials. Every mile was a test. The family's survival, the preservation of their networks, and the faint hope of a new beginning. They arrived in Iran with almost nothing but 3 weapons more powerful than any treasure. Connections forged over generations, knowledge of politics and commerce, and timing. Because fortune favors those who understand the world's machinery. David's father had served as chief treasurer in Baghdad, a position that demanded navigating bribery, power struggles, and shifting loyalties. From him, David learned not just accounting, but the psychology of officials, the art of persuasion, and the importance of being indispensable. And then, a map caught his eye. Bombay, a port city under British colonial rule exploding with trade. Cotton piled on docks, silver flowed into warehouses, and the British East India Company, more state than corporation, operated with absolute authority. They had armies, courts, and laws, answering only to London shareholders. And their most profitable commodity? Opium. David Sassoon arrived with almost nothing, yet he understood immediately. Opportunity was legal, profitable, and deadly. The British had created a perfect system for someone willing to navigate its rules. They needed merchants who could execute opium trade without dirtying official hands. The system was protection and profit intertwined, and David had both the skills and the nerve to dominate it. The Sassoons didn't just participate, they controlled the supply chain. They financed poppy farmers in India, providing loans that incentivized cultivation of opium over food. They owned warehouses at strategic points, near ports, ensuring swift shipment. They operated fleets of ships, avoiding dependence on external carriers. They managed insurance, reducing costs and risks. And everywhere, their agents knew local markets, local languages, and local laws, creating a network of trust, loyalty, and influence that money alone could not buy. By the 1832, Sassoon shipments flooded China. Tens of thousands of chests, each over 120 pounds, millions of pounds of opium. Entire coastal cities collapsed into addiction, families destroyed, farms failed. Silver flowed from China back to Britain. And yet, in Bombay, David Sassoon was celebrated. He funded synagogues, libraries, hospitals, docks, knighted, Sheriff of Bombay, a pillar of the community. Every building, every donation, every title was a shield, a mask. and an investment in immunity. But China resisted. Lin Zexu arrived in Canton, a man of unyielding integrity. He confiscated 1,400 tons of opium, destroyed it publicly, and demanded justice. Britain responded with war. First Opium War. Superior firepower, steamships, and strategic tactics decimated Chinese defenses. Cities burned, palaces looted, and cultural treasures destroyed. Second Opium War followed. China forced into humiliating treaties. The opium trade was legalized, sanctioned, unstoppable. Sassoon's empire was untouchable. And so the first act ends. A family of refugees becomes a global force. Millions addicted, entire economies reshaped, and a dynasty built not on armies or conquest, but on dependency and legality. Charity masks crime. Titles mask poison. History, at this stage, glorifies the wrong things. They were the family history forgot. Yet their reach would span continents. Before the Sacklers, before opioids ravaged America, there was the Sassoon family. A dynasty that turned addiction into a system, dependency into profit, and death into prestige. Millions addicted, nations destabilized, yet society applauded, knighted, honored, celebrated. They made billions while leaving chaos in their wake, and it all began with a flight. Baghdad, 1832. The sun blazed over narrow alleyways, glinting off sandstone domes. Merchants shouted over the clatter of carts, spices scented the air, and tension thickened the streets. David Sassoon, eldest son, watched the governor's men approach with ledgers in hand, demanding tribute and threatening imprisonment. Years of his father's careful accounting and trade networks were under siege. Extortion, violence, persecution, and for a Jewish family in Baghdad, the stakes were mortal. David's decision was instantaneous and irreversible. He would leave. Under the cover of night, he gathered his wife, children, and loyal aides. They carried precious manuscripts, account books, and small crates of trade goods. They traveled by caravan across deserts, mountains, and bandit-ridden routes, ever aware that a single mistake could mean death. This journey was not merely survival, it was the first act in a saga that would transform economies and addiction for generations. Iran became their first stop. Here, they re-established themselves modestly, leveraging David's three greatest assets: a web of merchant connections across the Middle East, a deep understanding of political and courtly mechanisms, and impeccable timing. His father, chief treasurer in Baghdad, had taught him to navigate bribery, influence, and power. Now, he applied that knowledge to survival and strategy. But his eyes were fixed further east. A map revealed Bombay, a booming colonial port under British rule. Cotton piles on docks, silver warehouses overflowing, and the British East India Company, a corporate state with armies, courts, and laws operating with zero oversight. Their most profitable commodity, opium. David Sassoon didn't merely see opportunity, he saw a machine for wealth, legal, colossal, and deadly. Britain had a problem. Its citizens addicted to tea, but China wanted nothing in return except silver. Silver flowed east, Britain's economy strained. The solution? Opium. Grow it in India, smuggle it into China, reverse the silver flow. Addiction industrialized. And David stepped into this perfect system. He didn't participate, he dominated. Sassoon financed poppy farmers, owned warehouses near ports, controlled fleets, operated insurance, and employed agents fluent in local languages and customs. Trust networks replaced armies. Vertical integration replaced violence. By the 1832, Sassoon shipments flooded China, tens of thousands of chests, millions of pounds, families destroyed, cities addicted. Silver returned to Britain. History would remember philanthropy, not poison. In Bombay, David Sassoon became a hero. Synagogues, libraries, docks, hospitals bore his name. Knighted, appointed sheriff. Charity became shield. Every donation, every title, every brick in a building, a mask, a statement, a shield against scrutiny. Yet resistance arose. Lin Zexu, incorruptible Chinese official, arrived in Canton. He seized 1,400 tons of opium, destroyed it in public ceremonies, demanding moral accountability. Britain responded with war, superior firepower, steamships, and tactics crushed Chinese defenses. Cities burned, palaces looted. The old summer palace, cultural treasure, destroyed. Second Opium War followed. China forced into humiliating treaties. Opium trade legalized. Sassoon untouchable. The first act ends. A refugee family becomes a global empire. Millions addicted. Economies reshaped. Philanthropy, masking, poison, titles masking, crime. By the mid-1832s, David Sassoon had transformed from a refugee merchant into a kingpin of opium, not through violence, but through sheer strategy, logistics, and intellect. Bombay's harbor, with its bustling docks and wooden warehouses stacked to the brim, became the nerve center of a continent-spanning operation. Sailors unloaded crates marked with foreign letters, and at night, the smell of opium processing hung in the air, a mixture of sweetness and menace. Sassoon's genius was vertical integration. He didn't just ship opium, he controlled every step. Farmers in Bengal grew poppies under loan agreements, incentivized to favor cash crops over sustenance. Warehouses lined the coast, staffed by trusted agents, some of whom spoke Mandarin, Cantonese, or Gujarati. The Sassoon fleet transported thousands of chests annually, braving monsoons, pirates, and the ever-present threat of Chinese patrols. Insurance companies, often owned or controlled by Sassoon affiliates, covered the voyages. Delays, theft, storms, everything remained profitable, because risk itself became part of the machinery. Within the family, a hierarchy emerged. David's eldest sons became directors of finance and trade. His younger sons managed fleets, warehouses, and foreign negotiations. Each was trained to navigate both commerce and politics, learning to charm British officials, bribe Indian rulers discreetly, and intimidate reluctant merchants subtly. Employees swore oaths, their loyalty bound by contracts, blood ties, and fear. In Canton, Sassoon agents mingled with Chinese merchants, some addicted, some complicit, all part of a system designed to funnel silver into British coffers. Families were destroyed quietly. Fathers squandered wages on opium, leaving children to starve. Shops closed. Farms failed. Entire cities became addicted to an imported poison, yet the economic calculations of empire deemed the suffering acceptable. Meanwhile, David Sassoon funded synagogues, schools, and hospitals in Bombay. Libraries rose with his name engraved in stone. Docks were extended. He became the model colonial philanthropist, wealthy, respectable, untouchable. The paradox was intentional. Philanthropy masked addiction. Titles masked crime. Charity became insurance against scrutiny. Tensions rose. Chinese officials like Lin Zexu tried to stop the flow of opium. Sassoon responded with diplomacy and strategy, ensuring shipments found alternate routes or delayed detection long enough to maintain profit. When Britain declared war to defend commercial interests, Sassoon provided ships, supplies, and loans, becoming a crucial actor in the First Opium War. By 1842, after the Treaty of Nanking, Sassoon's empire was legitimized. Opium trade became legal, sanctioned, untouchable. Sassoon's empire expanded further. Cotton, tea, silk, banking, and real estate. Every rupee earned from opium was reinvested into legitimate enterprises. The family's name became synonymous with success and philanthropy, masking the source of their wealth. They mastered the art of laundering social reputation, transforming poison into prestige. By the 1842s, the Sassoon Empire was no longer just a family business. It was a global machine of addiction, a well-oiled system where each chest of opium that left Bombay or Calcutta carried silver back to British coffers and destruction into Chinese homes. Entire port cities along the southern coast of China were collapsing under waves of addiction. Fathers smoked themselves into oblivion while their children scavenged for food, unable to work, unable to function. Shops closed, farms failed, productivity crumbled, and the Chinese economy teetered on the brink. The Qing dynasty could watch only helplessly as the silver that had sustained their empire for centuries flowed back to Britain through the toll of addiction. Lin Zexu, an incorruptible Chinese official appointed by the emperor, attempted to halt the tide, seizing over 1,400 tons of opium from warehouses and publicly destroying it in a dramatic act meant to send a moral message to the British and the world. He wrote directly to Queen Victoria, highlighting the paradox, the cruelty, the hypocrisy. The drug was banned in Britain but poured legally into China. The British response was war. Not negotiation, not concession, because their entire economic model depended on opium profits. 16 gunboats, superior firepower, steamships, trained military, and industrial technology crushed Chinese defenses. Cities were blockaded, armies defeated, and when the war ended with the Treaty of Nanking, China paid reparations, ceded Hong Kong, opened ports, and granted extraterritorial rights to British merchants. Yet nowhere did the treaty legalize opium explicitly, but enforcement mechanisms were removed, and the trade was impossible to stop. The Sassoons, who had financed and facilitated the British war effort, received first access to ports, expanded their operations, and watched their empire flourish legally, officially, untouchable. By the 1852, the family controlled not only opium but also cotton, tea, silk, banking, shipping, warehouses, and real estate. Every rupee from opium profits was reinvested into legitimate commerce, masking the origins of wealth, transforming poison into prestige, addiction into infrastructure. The family's philanthropy was not altruism but armor. They funded schools, libraries, docks, synagogues, hospitals, all bearing their name, making it socially impossible to question the source of their fortune. Their legacy, visible in stone and mortar, shielded them from scrutiny, making them pillars of society, while millions of lives were quietly destroyed. The cycle was clear. Industrialize addiction, integrate vertically, launder reputation through philanthropy, solidify legal and social protection, all while human suffering multiplied out of sight. By the 1860s and 1870s, the Sassoons had perfected the model of legal, socially acceptable addiction empires. Opium profits funded railways, telegraph lines, banks, and sprawling real estate. David Sassoon passed away in 1864, wealthy and respected, leaving his sons Albert and others to expand the family's reach. Albert Sassoon became a knight, a visible emblem of success, his name on buildings, hospitals, and libraries. He understood that visibility and philanthropy equated to immunity. The family invested in everything that gave them credibility, infrastructure, influence, and social capital. Yet behind the veneer of respectability lay the enormous human toll. Millions addicted, cities destabilized, economies distorted. Dependency became normalized, invisible, acceptable in polite society as the cost of progress. Even as the opium trade began to wane in some regions, the Sassoons' vertical integration and social legitimacy ensured their empire remained untouchable. Their reputation as philanthropists, builders of modern Bombay, and loyal subjects of the British Empire masked the immense destruction their wealth had caused. The lesson, unspoken yet glaring, was that social respectability could be purchased, and morality could be disguised under the weight of titles, buildings, and donations. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are chilling. The names change, the drugs change, but the system is identical. Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family industrialized addiction legally through OxyContin, generating tens of billions while destroying hundreds of thousands of lives in America. Johnson & Johnson, McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and countless others shipped pills in volumes far exceeding medical necessity, fully aware of the human cost, fully shielded by legality, by corporate structures, by lobbying power, by social respectability. They made donations, funded hospitals, endowed universities, plastered their names across institutions, laundering reputations just as the Sassoons did in Bombay. Legal immunity protected them until public outrage forced partial settlements. But billions remained, hidden, shielded, untouchable. Modern medical systems are designed to create permanent dependency. Pain management, ADHD medications, antidepressants, diabetes drugs, blood pressure medication, every chronic condition ensures a captive, paying population, echoing the centuries-old Sassoon strategy. Industrialize dependency, maximize profit, build legitimacy, and maintain social immunity. The parallels are clear. Addiction is industrialized, philanthropy shields the guilty, legality protects the operation, and human suffering is the silent cost. In every decade, a new drug, a new market, a new wave of dependency emerges. State-backed or legally sanctioned, these operations profit, while history, society, and institutions shield them, allowing the next generation to inherit both fortune and social legitimacy while repeating the same cycle. The story of the Sassoons teaches the modern observer that drug empires, whether 19th century opium or 21st century opioids, follow a consistent cycle. Rise with state or legal backing, exploit dependency for massive profit, buy social legitimacy through philanthropy and visibility, and eventually face partial collapse while preserving wealth, reputation, and influence. Respectable institutions are often built on blood money. Dependency is monetized, and legal systems protect profit over victims. History repeats. Industrialize addiction, profit, launder legitimacy, endure scrutiny, and pivot when necessary. David Sassoon and his descendants built modern Bombay, created infrastructure still in use today, and yet left millions destroyed along the trade routes to China. The Sacklers, Big Pharma, and their networks follow the same blueprint. Create dependency, profit massively, fund philanthropy to shield reputation, shift operations when accountability looms, and prepare the next generation to continue the system. Addiction is not a failure of individuals, but a system. A meticulously engineered enterprise, fully legal, socially respectable, and horrifyingly profitable. And unless history is studied, understood, and acted upon, the cycle will continue, with new names, new drugs, and the same catastrophic human cost, repeating generation after generation.